Hello, this is Vladimir Timoshenko with you, and we're starting right away with the main topic. Pokrovsk and Kupyansk remain the hottest spots on the map of the Russian-Ukrainian war. Right now, battles are raging in the industrial zone of Pokrovsk itself. What is happening on these sections of the front right now? More in our report. About
the fact that Russia is reducing pressure on Ukrainian armed forces positions in Pokrovsk is being reported by the Institute for the Study of War. According to analysts, the pace of the Russian offensive has slowed due to massive losses. And now those who have managed to survive the local assaults are waiting for reinforcements and hoping to restore logistics.
The Russians have reduced their activity in the city and decreased the number of movements. In this way, the Russian armed forces are trying to minimize their losses and are waiting for reinforcements from their main forces. This is confirmed by attempts of Russian forces to establish logistics through the southern outskirts of Pokrovsk. In particular, in this area, the Russians tried several times to transfer personnel using vehicles and motorcycles. The defense forces did not allow this to happen.
At the same time, the occupiers' main objective for today is to cut off Ukrainian logistics. The command notes that they have not succeeded in doing this. This is primarily due to the timely deployment of special units from the GUR, SBU, and SSO.
In tactical terms, there are indeed two objectives we can highlight here, tactical and strategic. Tactically, it is to recapture positions north of the city of Pokrovsk itself, and from Pokrovsk to take enemy positions and to impact logistics, which in many ways are indeed under the fire control of the Russian occupiers. However, this is not physical control, and today it was possible to create some alternative, albeit small, logistical corridors through which it is still possible to supply the troops.
Meanwhile, the East grouping of the Ukrainian armed forces reported yesterday that the defense forces have achieved partial success in the city. Assault units are clearing the city house by house and pushing the enemy back to the outskirts. As the military says, it is simply impossible to clearly define the positions of the sides in Pokrovsk today. After all, the entire settlement has effectively turned into a gray zone.
Our defense forces, also operating in small groups, are steadily and persistently pushing the Russians out, or at the very least, it is clear that they fully intend to push the Russians out of the industrial zone and from the northern and central parts of Pokrovsk. Well, at this point, it's quite difficult to say exactly how things will develop from here.
Meanwhile, Russia is trying to advance beyond the settlement, attempting to encircle it. From the north, however, the enemy suffers huge losses every day, essentially achieving no results. On the contrary, units, particularly Azov, that managed to eliminate the Russian breakthrough toward Dobropilya are moving ever closer directly to Pokrovsk. And this guarantees that the city will not be encircled, at least from the north.
By and large, the completion of this counter-offensive operation is smoothly transitioning and will most likely transition into the elimination of this northern snot of the Russians, which is aimed at encircling Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Therefore, on the one hand, the enemy's plan is clear. The intention of our command is also abundantly clear and is aimed at deblockading the Pokrovsk grouping.
Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky also commented on the situation. According to him, Pokrovsk is now a continuous fortified area. There are several places where the Russians managed to get through the engineering barriers, but the Ukrainian armed forces know exactly where these places are. Therefore, the situation as a whole is under control. At the same time, Syrsky added that the command already has plans B and V for all possible developments. Meanwhile, the Russian group has identified the Kharkiv region, specifically the city of Kupiansk, as the second most important pressure point for itself. Another statement by the Russian Federation about encircling Ukrainian troops there was refuted by Viktor Trehubov, head of the press service of the joint forces. In turn, military analysts note that the enemy is trying to use the Pokrovsk tactic here. However, its results are much more modest.
In the Kupiansk direction, in Kupiansk itself, the situation is significantly different. It seems that our command and our defenders have managed to bring the situation under control. And the enemy's actions in the city turned out to be less effective than the Russian command had hoped.
Another important reason for the pressure on Kupiansk, experts say, is to prevent Ukraine from transferring reserves to Pokrovsk. As is known, Putin gave his army until Friday to temporarily capture the city. And now the Russian command has concentrated half of its entire grouping in Ukraine right here.
Putin has set a strategic objective to capture the Pokrovsk agglomeration. He has not managed to advance on all sectors. He assumed that this would be an advance through Sumy region, Kharkiv region, at the 3 points we mentioned, in the area, for example, of Kupiansk and further on. Then Luhansk, Lyman, and from different directions to launch offensive operations. Of course, he believed the breakthrough would be in the Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhzhia regions, but there were not enough forces and resources.
And analysts add that there probably still won't be enough. According to information from our Center for Countering Disinformation, Russian army losses in the battle for Pokrovsk exceed both the number of new contract soldiers and mercenaries from other countries. And
now another extremely important topic. Ukraine does not leave the barbaric shelling of its energy infrastructure unanswered. For every strike on our facilities, there are equally painful strikes on the energy sector of the aggressor country. Russians need to get used to living without electricity, without heat, because retaliatory attacks will only intensify. And while Ukrainians have already adapted to blackouts over the past 3 winters, for Putin's subjects, this is something new. And after all, winters in Russia are long and cold. Here are the details. On the
night of November 9th, the Ukrainian armed forces struck the Voronezh thermal power plant. After the strike, electricity disappeared in several homes and then came back. The Voronezh thermal power plant is one of the largest suppliers of heat energy in the region and provides it to 4 districts of the city.
Right before my eyes, I had just stepped out onto the balcony. Right over there, just to be continued. Apparently it was through the power lines, basically. No, well, I heard 3, but they're saying 4. In
Belgorod, this incident was attacked, leaving tens of thousands of residents without electricity. The governor of the region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, stated that the damage is very serious.
As a result of yesterday evening's rocket attack, there is serious damage to the power and heating supply systems of the city of Belgorod. Our energy workers, as always, are heroically trying to cope with the task at hand. Right now, they are working to restore what was damaged by our enemies.
The day before, Ukrainian drones struck energy facilities in Saratov, Engels, and the Volgograd region. Power outages were also recorded there. Russia is attempting to plunge Ukraine into a blackout with massive drone and missile attacks. In turn, the Ukrainian army is launching symmetrical strikes against Russia's energy sector. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stated that the authorities are ready and will not only defend the infrastructure but also strike back in response.
what will happen with electricity? Today it's hard for me to say. We will be ready for any retaliatory challenges. We work on this every day. We will defend, we will fight. The Russians must know that step by step we will increase the production of everything so that they too feel what we feel. Volodymyr Zelensky, President of Ukraine. In
2025, Russia is experiencing a trend of increasing electricity shortages. As of October this year, the shortage of capacity in the power grid reaches tens of gigawatts. This was reported by the Ukrainian Foreign Intelligence Service.
Due to the demand from industrial, residential, and municipal consumers exceeding the total generation of all power plants, as of October this year, the shortage of capacity in the power grid has already reached 25 gigawatts. Despite the attempts by the REF government to introduce at least some measures to stabilize its energy system, such as monetary compensation or discounts on electricity bills for voluntarily reducing consumption during peak hours, as well as disconnecting consumers who do not require guaranteed power supply, the growing electricity deficit indicates a systemic crisis in the Russian energy sector. The Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine.
In addition to wear and overload, systematic strikes by the AFU are also affecting the Russian energy system. If Ukrainian strikes even partially damage Russian thermal power plants, this will cause significant problems for Russia's energy sector. The AFU have already brought a blackout in southern Russia 60% closer.
Strikes by the AFU are gradually knocking out high-voltage substations, which make it possible to transfer electricity from one region to another. If thermal power plants are also destroyed, their situation will become significantly more difficult than ours. Alexander Karchenko, director of the Energy Research Center. From
Not only Russian regions but also Moscow are suffering from Ukrainian drone attacks and the lack of electricity.
This has a very serious, not just propagandistic impact directly on the Kremlin. Let me remind you that one of the reasons for launching the so-called special military operation was the issue of guaranteeing the security of the Russian Federation itself. At least that's how Putin and his inner circle explained it. We can see how the war is coming directly to Moscow. And not just to Muscovites. We see that the geography of Ukraine's drone attacks is expanding.
Ukrainians have long since gotten used to and adapted to power and heating outages. But for Russians, this is an unexpected surprise. So it's time to start stocking up on matches, candles, and firewood.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
And right now, here is an analysis of the current situation on the Alexandrovsk front. The enemy is becoming more aggressive here as well. On the Alexandrovsk front, Ukrainian defenders have repelled 4 enemy assault attempts. Another clash is still ongoing. The enemy tried to advance in the areas of the settlements of Ivanivka, Soznivka, Vranoe, Aristopol, and Yegorivka. Meanwhile, Russia is also on fire. From the south all the way to Bashkortostan, in Tuapse, the long-suffering port is burning vividly. Ukrainian naval drones carried out an operation there. And in Bashkiria, 4 Russian logistics facilities have been destroyed. More on this and other topics in our military review.
Everything is as usual in Russia. The night is loud and bright. Explosions thundered in Tuapse. The local port was attacked by naval drones.
Film it, look, it's burning.
The occupiers can't hide on the front either. Ukrainian border guards destroyed 5 enemy shelters along with the Russians inside. Bashkortostan and Vologda also came under attack. 4 military logistics facilities of the occupiers were destroyed at once. Ukraine's defense forces continue clearing Pokrovsk of occupiers. Russian troops have temporarily slowed the pace of their offensive in the city and its surroundings. At the same time, the invaders are blocking Ukrainian logistics in Mirnohrad, hoping to break the city's defenses, according to the Institute for the Study of War.
The occupiers are trying to take control of the logistics of Ukraine's defense forces, not only in Pokrovsk, but also accordingly in the Mirnohrad area. A sharp increase in the number of attacks. In the area of Shakov, which is a key settlement that was deoccupied by Ukraine's defense forces, control over it poses a threat to the entire Russian occupiers' incursion in the Dobropilia direction.
The intensity of fighting in Pokrovsk has decreased, but this does not mean that the Russians have abandoned their plans to occupy the city. The Ukrainian command has plans in place for various possible developments, said the commander-in-chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Of the Russian occupation army. This is about 90,000 personnel.
And while the Ukrainian armed forces are fighting the occupiers, Putin is making new plans. Volodymyr Zelensky considers it quite likely that Russia could open a second front against another European country before the war in Ukraine ends.
The Russian Federation is probing for a weak link in NATO's defense system. In other words, it is casting doubt on the very nature of what is possible. The practical implementation of Article 5 of the NATO Charter on Collective Security. In addition, the Russian Federation is constantly trying to raise the level of tension, including at the borders with NATO countries, specifically Finland and Sweden.
For the past several years, Russia has been actively using elements of hybrid warfare, although Moscow traditionally denies any involvement. Against the backdrop of Russian drone incursions, Britain is strengthening Belgium's defenses. Meanwhile, in Germany, they have admitted that
at the present moment and for the time being, the current situation remains unchanged. As things stand right now, there are no immediate developments, so for now, this is how things are. At this time, they are not ready because they still need more time and preparation. They have not yet gained enough confidence or experience to move forward. Specifically designed for war in preparation and readiness. as a state. That is why it is no coincidence that Germany ranks second after the United States in terms of military technical assistance to Ukraine.
Meanwhile, in Moscow, they continue to rattle their nuclear sabers. It seems this is the Kremlin's eternal scenario. Putin's spokesman Peskov, the talking mustache, made it clear that if the US really conducts a nuclear test, Russia will be forced to respond in kind.
According to Western intelligence agencies, there is currently activity observed on the Russian side at the test site on the Pelaginova Zemlya archipelago. In other words, this is yet another escalation of so-called stakes by Putin and, accordingly, the Russian Federation. Putin understands perfectly well that the nuclear argument is the last resort that the Russian Federation can use in negotiations with the United States at the moment of ending the war in Ukraine.
In turn, Ukraine, together with its partners in the European Union, is preparing a proposal for the 20th package of sanctions against Russia, which should include additional restrictions on the Russian energy sector, the Shadow Fleet, and companies that support the aggressor's military-industrial complex.
And now we move to the Lyman direction of the front. The so-called Russian world continues to destroy, kill, and maim here as well. In the Lyman direction, the invading army carried out 2 attacks on Ukrainian positions near the settlements of Kurovy Yar and towards Lyman. One of the battles is still ongoing. And once again, there are explosions in Crimea. After the drone struck, an oil depot in Simferopol caught fire. And also, in the area of the former Donetsk airport, a storage, assembly, and launch base for Shaheds was hit by fire. Overall, the successful attacks by the Ukrainian armed forces on Russian military targets in Crimea and Donbass indicate preparations for the deoccupation of these Ukrainian regions. The evidence is in our next report.
A unique operation that lasted for months ended with a spectacular explosion in the middle of Donetsk. According to locals, nothing like this has ever been seen before in the occupied territories. Where did the strike hit? What was destroyed? And most importantly, what did the Ukrainian armed forces use?
Judging by the special effects and the massive explosions, Flamingo missiles were used.
So, let's go through everything step by step. Last night, a powerful explosion rocked Donetsk, after which, according to eyewitness videos, a fireball rose into the sky resembling a nuclear mushroom cloud, and windows were blown out in buildings several kilometers from the epicenter. Right now,
my windows have been blown out.
In fact, this is the Oktyabrski airport area. A large ammunition depot, missiles hit there. There is no official information yet, but people are already talking about an ammunition depot. I watched the video, it's spectacular. Most likely, it really was a very large missile or ammunition depot, because in the video, just like in science fiction movies or computer games, there's an explosion, and then a second explosion, and you can clearly see this glowing, rapidly expanding shockwave. So the strike on the depots in Donetsk was very successful.
A bit later, some clarity on this issue was provided by Robert Magyar-Brudi, the head of UAV systems for the Ukrainian armed forces. According to his information, the strike hit a large warehouse of Shahed-type drones, where warheads were also stored.
Targeting this complex objective became a painstaking intelligence operation lasting several months, pieced together from small fragments. Last night, Special Operations Forces and missile troops of the Ukrainian Defense Forces carried this out using appropriate strike assets.
Analysts note that despite the range of the Shahed drones, it was extremely important for the Russians to keep the warehouse for these drones close to the front line. After all, when the occupiers launch UAVs just a few dozen kilometers from the line of contact, the Ukrainian armed forces simply don't have time to respond quickly. As a result, the drones carry out their terror in frontline cities and also strike at the forward positions of our troops.
Disrupting the logistics of supplying shells and missiles for drones to the Pokrovsk direction, to Pokrovsk itself, is very important for us right now.
But there is something the defense forces under our command chose not to disclose. One thing is certain, drones definitely took part in the attack, but something else followed them as well.
As the footage from there shows, it was clearly not just drones at work. Apparently, they were distracting the local air defense. But the final strike was delivered by something resembling a rocket. It could have been a drone or possibly a missile.
The fact that missiles were indeed used is also confirmed by Madia's reports about the participation of Ukraine's missile forces in the attack.
I don't think the Shahed warehouse was unprotected, that it was just some hangars. Most likely. It was probably some kind of underground bunker. And that's another reason why I think these were flamingos. Of course, they could have used Storm Shadow as well. Storm Shadow would have worked here too. They have an anti-bunker function. Nevertheless, the scale of the detonation shows that, at least it seems to me, if you look at the first second, the explosion was clearly bigger than just a couple 100 kilograms of a Storm Shadow warhead.
So yes, most likely these were indeed our Ukrainian flamingos. By the way, this is already the third time just this week that they've inflicted colossal damage on the Russians. But in Crimea, such power wasn't needed, so drones were sent to attack the peninsula. In occupied Simferopol, around 2:30 in the morning, a fire broke out at an oil depot. It is believed to be the Krimneftezbit facility in the area of the village of Bitumnoye. There were also reports of 4 strikes in Gvardeyskoye, after which smoke rose into the sky. There, the hits likely struck the local thermal power plant, which temporarily ceased operations.
Now, let's analyze the current situation on the Konstantinovka front line. The enemy army's bloody rampage continues here as well. On the Konstantinovka front, the enemy attempted to break through our defenses 10 times in the areas of the settlements of Pleshevka, Alexandra Shultino, Rusinyar, and Sofievka. The Russian army is suffering colossal tank losses. Over 11,300 vehicles have already been destroyed since the start of the full-scale war. Moreover, manufacturers are facing global problems. A testament to this dire situation is the mass layoffs at Russia's leading Uralvagonzavod plant. Right now, we're going to tell you how Putin's tank potential has melted away.
We must not only keep pace with the global economy, but strive to outpace its dynamics by unlocking our own potential.
But in Russia, there is neither dynamism nor potential to be seen. In particular, even the most resilient are now starting to go under. For example, the Russian military giant Uralvagonzavod, which produces armored vehicles and enjoys all the privileges of the military-industrial complex, can't cope and is falling apart at the seams.
What is the plant's management doing? They don't formally fire people, but instead switch them to a 4-day work week with a 20% pay cut. Or even a 3-day work week. That means a 40% pay cut. This is exactly what's happening right now. But even that is no longer helping. And that was the stage we were at. According to the latest statistics, about 250,000 people in Russia have been working like this recently.
And now even cutting shifts to the bare minimum doesn't work anymore. Layoffs are coming at the enterprise that is the flagship of Russian tank manufacturing. This was reported by the Russian publication E1. In some departments, up to 50% of the staff are expected to be laid off, and across the entire enterprise, 1 in 10 employees will lose their job.
Previously, it was kind of like this. The civilian production might not have been very profitable, but there was a lot of money coming in from military contracts, and that somehow made up for it. But now it seems that even spending on military products is being cut, and it looks like the railcar division is relying on profits from the military sector. It can't cover the losses from the civilian sector, so now they're going to lay off people in civilian production, reportedly about 10%.
Experts explain that the reason for all this is the incredible decline of the Russian economy. Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, which are depriving Russia of millions in petrodollars, Western sanctions, and increased pressure from the US on the Russian oil industry, have already led to a situation where even the negative forecasts for the economy are inaccurate. It will get even worse.
Let me remind you, their negative forecast from the central bank is a GDP decline of 2.5 to 3.5%, inflation at 12%, and an interest rate of 20%. In other words, they will have to raise the rate back up to 20% next year. And that's their negative scenario, which I don't even consider negative. It's just the current reality. That's the point. The thing is, the accumulated problems, they just keep popping up every day, and they prevent the central bank from maintaining the scenario it considers manageable.
The situation has escalated to the point where the economic decline in Russia has to be publicly acknowledged.
Question. Is that enough? Is this what we wanted?
In fact, even according to official data, recession has already affected 19 out of 24 sectors of the Russian economy. Moreover, they're even starting to have problems with defense industry enterprises. If these enterprises are already experiencing non-payments, not getting money from the budget, and the work week is being reduced, for example, Uralvagonzavod, this means their funding was cut, well, about 3 months ago. So these processes are actually happening.
At the same time, the funniest thing is that in Russia, they've already figured out how to present this information to the higher-ups. Everything is in the spirit of negative growth and unsuccessful successes. So now, they're openly talking about the economic decline. At the same time, they add that there was such an unprecedented boom before, it simply couldn't last forever. So now we're seeing a decline.
That's their strategy. To say, no, there's no recession, no economic downturn. Then to release a statement saying that, yes, most likely there will be an economic decline in the fourth quarter. And to accompany all of this with a bunch of disclaimers.
The obvious solution was, once again, to revise the budget draft. Naturally, in the direction of negative growth.
We are holding a whole series of meetings on the framework of the country's main financial document, its primary priority.
And as before, the priority remains the war. So analysts are not advising to expect any improvements. And if the cuts have already affected the industrial giants of the military-industrial complex, then all enterprises in the country, including private ones, are next in line.
Now, let's move to the southern Slobozhensky sector of the front. Putin's army is up to its usual tricks here as well. In the southern Slobozhansky direction, the enemy carried out 8 attacks in the areas of Volchansk, Volchanskaya Utory, and Kamenka. 2 combat clashes are still ongoing. The Ukrainian armed forces destroyed and damaged a record number of Russian oil refineries in 2025. And drivers all across Russia are feeling the effects of this more and more. And it will only get worse since the drone sanctions from the Ukrainian armed forces are only intensifying. What should the aggressors expect? You'll see now.
The Ukrainian armed forces' attacks on Russian oil refineries are setting new records in both range and frequency.
We are striking only legitimate targets. Oil extraction and refining make up 90% of Russia's defense budget. These are dirty oil rubles with which the enemy is killing us. If we look at the statistics for September and October of this year, that's 20 targets. Among them are 6 oil refineries, 2 oil terminals, 3 oil depots, and 9 oil pumping stations.
As of early November 2025, Ukraine has carried out 111 strikes on oil depots and refineries in Russia. For comparison, throughout all of 2024, there were 94 such incidents. As a result, the Russian Federation is facing enormous problems with oil refining volumes, as well as shortages of fuel and gasoline on the domestic market. What has this led to? This has resulted in a 20% deficit in petroleum products on the domestic market and the idling of 37% of oil refining capacity, as well as fuel shortages in 57 regions of the Russian Federation and a ban on gasoline exports until the end of this year.
Because of the ban on gasoline exports until the end of the year.
The Federal Highway M12 Moscow-Kazan. Are rolling highway gas stations. Just one station every 150 kilometers. At each station, there are lines of cars stretching 1.5 to 2 kilometers, all waiting to refuel. I'll show you what this looks like now, and when we'll actually be able to refuel, no one knows. I counted 130 cars ahead of us.
But it's not just about the quantity, it's also about the quality. The range at which Russian oil refineries can be hit has almost doubled. If last year the farthest target was the Salavat refinery in Bashkortostan, about 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, on October 6, 2025, Ukrainian drones reached the Tuapse refinery more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine. According to calculations by journalists from the publication Vertka, the effectiveness of Ukrainian drone strikes is 85%. Out of 250 strikes since the start of the full-scale war, 213 have been successful. Many facilities, especially in southern Russia, have been attacked repeatedly. For example, the Ryazan, Volgograd and Ilsky refineries have each been attacked 10 times. In order
to somehow put this war into a stalemate, to shift it, we need to learn not only to repel enemy attacks on the front line, but also to suppress their logistics and their aviation. That's why it became necessary. And I'm not even mentioning the need to strike at Russia's military-industrial enterprises and energy system.
During the war, Ukraine first launched from scratch and then significantly ramped up the production of long-range and rocket-powered drones. Russian oil refineries are being terrorized by UAVs like Lyuchi, Polyanitsia, Peklo, and FP-1. Drones costing just a few $1,000s are causing damage to the Russian budget amounting to hundreds of millions of dollars.
Look at those guys. The 7th hit at this stage is catching fire. Yeah. That's the 7th drone coming in right now.
At the same time, following the drones, Ukraine is also ramping up mass production of long-range missiles. According to experts, if Ukraine uses cruise missiles like the Flamingo with a range of 3,000 kilometers and a 1,000-kilogram warhead, there will be nothing left of the Russian oil refineries.
If a strike hits an oil refinery, it will be impossible to restore that refinery. That is, it will be completely, if before it was possible, when a drone hits, you can replace the damaged parts with spares in a few weeks or a month. But in this case, everything will be destroyed down to the ground. The entire distillation column will be completely destroyed. And with just 2 pairs of such missiles, all that will remain of the refinery are memories.
The trend is that there will be more and more strikes in the future. And what about gasoline? And there is less and less gasoline and other fuel in Russia.
That's all for today, but very soon on Front News you'll see new unique reports from our journalists straight from the hottest spots of the war, brought to you so you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.